Chapter 6, in which the plot thickens. Wisps of fog clung like tattered rags to the trees, and then the forest cleared. But so thick were the pines that the morning sun barely touched the ground. Hold Your Nose Billy pushed aside a low branch, revealing a rickety timbered hut with a moldy thatched roof. "Here's our castle, your young majesty," he said, chuckling. "Accept our hospitality. I hope you won't mind sleeping on the floor." The floor was hard-packed earth. Braided garlic bulbs hung like knotted ropes from the rafters. "I'm hungry," announced Prince Brat. "And feast you will," said Hold Your Nose Billy. "Cutwater, serve him up our finest bread and herring." Jemmy had many a meal on bread and herring. When he was in luck, he felt hungry enough to ask for seconds. Prince Brat bared his teeth. "I'd sooner eat mud." He reached for the wicker basket, but Cutwater snatched it back. "What we got here?" muttered the bone-thin man, and threw back the lid. "Roll your eyes at this, Billy. Meat pies, looks like, and fruit tarts, and a brace of roast pheasant. We'll eat like kings." "Hands off, that's mine!" the prince cried out. "Was yours," yapped Cutwater. Lux, Jimmy thought. Hadn't the prince run away in royal style? He had even brought a china plate, a silver spoon, and a silver knife for himself. Digging around deeper in the basket, the garlicky outlaw called out to Cutwater, "Bring the lantern closer. What's this?" In the gloom of the hut, the big man lifted out a golden crown. "That's mine," bleated the prince. "Was yours," corrected Hold Your Nose Billy, placing the crown on the tangled red nest of his hair. "Prince Hold Your Nose Billy," Cutwater burst out joyously. He began to scratch himself as if his shirt were crawling with fleas, which Jemmy thought it probably was. "We're dog rich." "That crown? A trifle," scoffed Hold Your Nose Billy. "We can be richer'n dog rich." The empty-headed prince, Jemmy thought. Why had he brought along his crown? To cock it on his head and expect vagabonds and cutthroats to fall to their knees? The big, raw-faced outlaw grabbed Prince Brat off the ground and took the heft of him as if he were weighing a sack of potatoes. "£55 by my reckoning," he said. "We'll write the king a command, Cutwater. £55 of gold coins in trade for his royal tadpole." Chapter 7, Being an Account of a Great Mix-Up. Cutwater rummaged around in the black oak chest of stolen goods. Handkerchiefs flew out like soiled white doves. Worn shoes, ladies' combs, a cowbell, a junk heap. They've had lean pickings, this raggedy pair of highwaymen, Jimmy thought, and maybe not as smart and clever as the song sellers made out. "Here's a scrap of paper, Billy," said Cutwater, finding it in the pocket of his stolen coat. "But how are we going to do the scribblement? We can't write." "I've seen it done. Sharpen us a hawk's feather, Cutwater." "I'm hungry," complained the prince. "I'll have a veal pie, sir." Hold Your Nose Billy ignored him. He poked around for a beetroot and squeezed out the juice with his bare hands. It dripped like blood onto a china plate. "There's ink for you, Prince. Take the hawk's feather and scratch out your message." Prince Brat folded his arms. "I don't take orders from curs and villains." "Think of your pa," said Hold Your Nose Billy. "He'll be ever so much obliged to know you're safe and hearty." "I told you, I'm hungry." "You won't eat a bean till you do us the document." "But I can't write," blurted out Prince Brat. "And crows can't fly," erupted the big outlaw with a blast of garlicky breath. "You're prince. Kings and such like are learned to write and read as soon as they tumble out of the cradle. Don't think you can pull the wool over our eyes. Hop to it." "But I can't so much as scratch my own name." Jemmy shot a calculating glance at Prince Brat. His pesky hide hardly seemed worth saving, but a scheme had leaped into his head. He might be able to trick these mangy outlaws into letting the prince go, and Jemmy would be rid of Prince Brat once and for all. "Give me the hawk's quill. I'll write the words," he announced. "That's right," Prince Brat chimed in. "My whipping boy knows his letters. Fall to, Jimmy from the streets." "Hold on," said Hold Your Nose Billy, his sharp gaze flicking from one boy to the other. "This ignorant whipping boy knows his letters, and the royal prince can't sign his own names? Something's amiss here." "What you thinking, Billy?" asked Cutwater. "I'm thinking these lads have mixed themselves up to flummox us." Jemmy lifted his head arrogantly and tried to look as prince-like as possible. "Nonsense! I'm a mere whipping boy." The big man rumbled up a laugh, showing a mouthful of yellow teeth. You'll take us for bedrock numbskulls? Certain as eggs is eggs. You're the prince, the genuine, straight up and down Royal Highness. Prince Brat's face turned red as a hot iron. That ratty street orphan, he bellowed. That lowborn. Silence, Jemmy commanded. Can't you see the game is up? They're onto us. Hold your tongue. But I'm his Royal Highness. Gah, Jemmy thought. This haughty prince didn't have a sense of a gnat. Couldn't he see a plan afoot? Save your breath, snapped Jemmy. Stop giving yourself airs, you witless servant boy. Servant boy, dare you address me? Bag your head, snapped Hold-Your-Nose Billy. Give him a kick, Cutwater, if we hear another peep out of him. Hand me the hawk's feather, said Jemmy. All right, my papa, the king. Chapter 8. The Ransom Note. Hold-Your-Nose Billy tilted the princely crown on his head. What have you written down so far? Jemmy glanced up from the sheet of paper. To the king's most sacred majesty, dear papa. Aye, that sounds proper respectful. What else? Our captors are loyal subjects, but scoundrels by trade. Don't cross them. Make that a mite stronger, said the outlaw, beginning to pace. Tell 'em we're shameful mean, and rough as sackful of nails. Warn 'em we fear no gallows. Jemmy dipped the quill in peat juice and continued scribbling. I'll tell 'em you've got reserved seats in hell. Aye, that's the ticket. Cutwater had begun gnawing away at a roasted pheasant, and his cheeks swelled out as if he had a monstrous toothache. What about the king's soldiers, Billy? Now the fog's lifted, they'll be following the lad like a trail of ants. Puts my spine a shiver. Faugh! Exclaimed Hold-Your-Nose Billy. Even rabbits get muxed up and lost in this forest. We're well hid, Cutwater. I'll warn Papa, Jemmy offered generously, that if you spy out a single uniform, you'll crack my neck like a chicken's. Prince Brat sat sullenly on a pile of moldy bedstraw. He glared icily at the whipping boy who had seized his royal title. And don't forget the reward, Billy, said Cutwater. We want the prince's weight in gold bangers, right? Tell the king that, directed Hold-Your-Nose Billy, in big letters, and let me reckon out a safe spot to deliver the loot. Jemmy dipped the quill, but then paused. Gah, he thought, it's not enough to choose my words as if I were a prince. Show some high and mighty Jemmy. Think like a prince. Dimwits, he flared up. Catch penny rogues! I will not be exchanged for such a trifle. My mere weight? A paltry treasure you could carry on a shoulder. How dare you insult me? Hold-Your-Nose Billy's red eyebrow shot up in a bewildered surprise. Insult you? A trifle? A prince is worth a prince's ransom. The eyebrows lowered as quickly as they had risen. No offense meant, lad. How would you calculate a proper ransom? A wagon load of gold at the very least, and jewels mixed in. As I'm alive, a wagon load? Cutwater gulped down the wad of fowl in his mouth. We did forget about jewels, Billy. A wagon load it is, then, exclaimed the hairy outlaw. Prince Brat's mouth fell wide open at the whipping boy's nervy mischief. Hold-Your-Nose Billy stood over Jemmy's shoulder and watched the words being scratched out. Finally he said, Have you made your sign yet? About to, replied Jemmy. With as much flourish as he could manage, he wrote, Your obedient son, Prince Horus. Chapter 9. Revealing Jemmy's plan to trick the villains. Hold-Your-Nose Billy popped a clove of garlic into his mouth, ground it between his yellow teeth, and helped himself to a veal pie. Nothing like garlic to clear the head and fend off the plague. Cutwater, give the lads a ration of breakfast. The scrawny outlaw sliced off 2 thick pieces of coarse bread. He draped a salt herring across each slice. Eat hearty, little fellers. This smelly stuff? Prince Brat glared at the bread and herring. It's not fit for flies. Why, we eat it regular, worms and all, said Cutwater, picking the bones of the pheasant. I'll starve first. Suit yourself, Cutwater snickered. This is the first time we've feasted off the king's own table, and there's hardly enough for me and Billy. Jemmy sat on the bedstraw beside the prince and contemplated his breakfast. He examined the bread closely, hunting for varmints. The prince, he knew, had never been starved enough to pick out wildlife from his grub. Eat, he whispered. I can't find any crawly things in it. The bread's stale, grumbled the prince. Stale enough to patch a roof, but I've scoffed down worse." The prince began to nibble around the edges. Hold Your Nose Billy glanced over and grinned. "Take a chopped garlic, whipping boy. It'll improve the taste considerable." Cutwater wiped his thin, greasy lips with the back of his hand. "Billy, how do we know the prince ain't laid a trap for us in that message? He could have said one thing and wrote another. Where'll we find someone to read it off to us?" Jemmy lifted his chin to a regal height. "You doubt the word and honor of your prince? Insolent oafs, curs, I'll have you horsewhipped." Cutwater yanked Jemmy to his teeth. "Who you calling them names? I'll flog your hide pink as a salmon." Hold Your Nose Billy pushed him aside. "Keep your wits. It's worse than common murder to lay hands on a prince. No need to break any more of a king's laws than we have to. If it comes to a flogging, there's his whipping boy." The prince's eyes widened and his face blanched white. The prospect of taking a whipping himself had never occurred to him. "But, sir, it wasn't me who called you names." Cutwater gave a sudden hackle. "Sir, is it now? That's more like it. But tell the prince here to keep a civil tongue in his head." Prince Brat shot Jemmy a poisonous look. The garlicky outlaw was leaning closer to Jemmy. "See here, Prince, it's not that we doubt your word and honesty, not a bit. But all the same, let's hear you read off the message." Jemmy turned away from the man's breath and began to read. No, lad. Let's have it bottom to top. Have it from bottom to top. Read it backwards. I do hope your whipping boy's sake you don't stumble and trip as if the real words ain't on paper." Jemmy shrugged. "It says, 'Son, obedient your obedient son,'" said Hold Your Nose Billy. "Keep at it. Jewels and gold of cart full of ransom a demand they demand ransom of a cart and a full." The outlaw himself began to stumble and trip over the words. "Aye, that's the ticket." Jemmy read the message through backward, and then a second time before the hairy outlaw was satisfied. "Now then," he said, "all we got to do is get the message to the king without getting nabbed in the act." "Simple," declared Jemmy. "Send it to the castle in the hands of my whipping boy." Chapter 10, in which Prince Brat lives up to his name. Hold Your Nose Billy clapped a leery eye on the Ratcatcher's son. "Prince, do you take me for a precious fool? Send your whipping boy to blab out where we hid, eh? The king will come chopping down every tree he finds out, if he finds out we're nested in the forest." Jemmy assumed a princely air of indifference. "Then tote the message yourself. It's no skin off my ear if you never get back alive." He filled his mouth with bread and herring. "I declare, this is tasty." Prince Brat scoffed under his breath. He hadn't shown a moment's interest in Jemmy's scheme to free him. Their eyes met and clashed. "Gah," Jemmy thought, "he's fuming like a stovepipe at being unprinced. He'll have me charged with treason." "I'll stand guard over the prince," said Cutwater. "You're the one to go, Billy." "Me?" hooted the big man. "Me, that they sing songs about and pinch their noses at the first whiff of garlic? It would be off with the head of Hold Your Nose Billy." "Unlikely," corrected Jemmy. "True, Papa would have you tortured a mite to loosen your tongue, but he wouldn't have your head, not Papa. He favors slow boiling in oil." The effect on the outlaws was instant. Hold Your Nose Billy's jaw dropped. Sweat broke out across his face like raindrops. "Cutwater, you're skin and bones. You could slip in and out of a keyhole. I'll guard the prince." "Faugh, Billy. I don't fancy being boiled to a crisp." The hairy outlaw gave a loud and decisive snort. "We'll send the whipping boy." Jemmy held back a sigh of relief. "And my crown with him." "Your golden crown?" blurted out Cutwater. "Not by half we won't." Jemmy made the pretense of blazing up with impatience. "Simpleton! I swear there are not two more ignorant, cloven-footed blockheads in the land." Prince Brat shot Jemmy a quick thunder-scowl look. "Stop it," he whispered harshly. "Don't give them the rough side of your tongue. You'll get me whipped." Jemmy ignored him. "Donkeys!" he continued. "Before the day is out, dozens of villains will deliver up false claims. Only my crown will convince Papa that you are the genuine villain." Hold Your Nose Billy began to pace, munching garlic cloves as if they were grapes. Finally, he tipped the crown off his head and flung it to Prince Brat. "Whipping boy, deliver it to the king. If he doesn't follow our instructions to the letter, the prince will be done for," Cutwater snickered. drawing a knife-like finger across his throat. And blab all you want, added the other outlaw. We'll pack the prince off to a different hiding place. By its smelly tail, Prince Brett tossed aside the uneaten herring. Without showing the slightest concern for Jimmy's fate, he flicked a glance at the two outlaws. I'll deliver nothing, he exploded. I won't go back to the castle.